many of you have seen. I don't know how many of you have seen a documentary called Magic Trip. It's about it's about when King Kesey. It's about when King Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. It's filmed it's 7 o'clock in the summer of 19. Yeah. Okay. Now, in the summer of 1964, by that time, King Kesey, he was only 29 years old. He'd already published One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Sometimes a Great Notion. And he and his group of merry pranksters got together. They left where Kesey was living in Mojave, California, painted this psychedelic school bus and drove it across the United States in 1964 with the idea that they were going to end up at the New York World's Fair that was going on at that time. I'm tying this into Dr. Mitchell's comments about Kerouac and the hippies. Well, driving the bus was Neal Cassidy. You know, he was the Dean Moriarty character in On the Road, Kerouac's lifelong companion. So here they are with Cassidy driving the bus across the country. And they get to this place. They get to New York, and because of King Kesey's connections, you know, pranksters are staying in this very swank Park Avenue apartment, or it might have been more than one apartment. And Cassidy decides there needs to be a reunion. There needs to be a meeting between Kerouac and King Kesey. So he takes the bus. He drives his bus out to Northport, where Jack is living with his mother, and gets Jack to come back in to New York City with him so he can meet King Kesey. And all the pranksters, they want to meet Jack Kerouac. Here he is, the author of On the Road, and Neal Cassidy. You know, Dean Moriarty has just driven us across the country in this bus. I'm talking about it, and so he goes out to Northport, where Jack was living with his mother, and brings him back into New York and gets him into the apartment where Kesey and the pranksters are. I'm playing off your thing about Kerouac and the hippies here. And it's kind of the clip that made it into this documentary, Magic Trip. It's actually kind of sad in a way, because what it shows is, first of all, Kerouac comes in, and they're sitting on the couch they're sitting on. They got an American flag over it, and he's offended by this. Yeah. And he asks him to get up, and he folds the flag, you know, gives it that triangular fold and puts it somewhere. That part didn't make the clip. I wasn't sure why it did, but the part that made the clip that I found kind of sad is here is Kerouac sitting at the end of this couch, looking the way he looked in 1964, and he's got a can of beer in his hand, and he's kind of drooped down like this, and all the pranksters are sort of carrying on around him, and he's got this. I realize I'm doing my own interpreting here, but he's got this look on his face that says, "Good God, you mean I started all of this?" Like, sir, you could just tell he was completely bewildered. Yeah. He was just completely bewildered by what was going on there, when it was his novel that kicked off what had got that in the first place. Yeah, Jerry, go ahead.
In Patrick Fenton's play, Kerouac's Last Call, in a monologue, Kerouac talks about that, and he says he was really offended when they sat on the flag, and he almost got in a fight. He told the guys to get their asses off that flag, and Cassidy had to pull him away. And but he didn't think highly of the hippies.
It was Cassidy that finally had to calm him down.
Yeah.
It was Cassidy had to calm him. Come on, Jack, it's okay. Well, I just wanted to get that was my little story to get us back together again here. Any kind of comments, responses, either for Dr. Mitchell or myself, we'd be glad to have that. Get that conversation going right now.
Did you guys think that Kerouac might have been kind of a mama's boy?
Oh, yeah, I got a whole. If you get the book, I got a whole chapter on that. I got a whole chapter on that one.
Check that out in the book, because the more I researched him, you know, when I played him on stage, the more I, you know.
Well, I'll see if I can do the 30-second version of what I say in that. Yeah. Do you want to know why I think Kerouac is a mama's boy?
Yeah.
Buy the book.
I'm good. I got it.
I got a whole chapter. Got a whole chapter on that. But part of it is, you know, most of the. Oh, it's your seat, isn't it, Mike? Let me grab my chair here. You know, in any kind of. any kind of maturation, when you're growing up, and if you've raised a kid to adulthood, you know what I'm talking about as well as coming of age yourself. You reach a certain point, usually in your late teens, sometime maybe into the early 20s, I'd say late teens, where you have to sever the parent-child relationship in order that you can then come back and relate to your parents on an adult-to-adult level. Kerouac never quite did that. When it came to his, he never quite did that when it came to his mother. And I think a part of it, like a lot of stuff in Kerouac's life, it goes back to Gerard. And you know, he writes about how his, I can't remember the passage, I use it in the book, I don't want to try to look for it now, but he talks about how his mother thought that, you know, felt Gerard was always in his mother's mind, and he said Gerard was my mom's little angel all throughout my life. And I guess he felt that he had to be that little angel. He felt he had to be the little angel for his mother that she lost when Gerard died. Really complicated relationship. That's as much as I'm going to go with it now. Like I say, read the rest of the chapter. Jump in, anyone. Either for myself or Dr. Mitchell, either one.
Well, Dr. Mitchell, when you were saying that Kerouac should have been a teacher or something, I don't think he wanted to settle down.
No.
He was always on the go.
Yeah.
So he couldn't settle down. He couldn't be a teacher or something because he was always like, find the next place to go. Or...
Yeah, and that restlessness that he felt, that he always had to be constantly moving. Mm-hmm. And what is he looking for in that constant movement from, you know, from Lowell and New York and Florida and California and taking the road trips out west and going to Europe? Why couldn't he settle down? Maybe he felt that he had to have those life experiences in order to write about what he was experiencing on the road, traveling around. Settling down as a teacher, I couldn't see Kerouac having the patience to deal with high school students.
But his parents were always moving. His parents were always moving too.
Yeah.
They were always moving. They were all over the place too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think three very interesting themes that you highlighted in the response were, one, the Kerouac suffering, right? And that, I think you put that into the context of him as an artist, but also the way he projected his suffering through Catholicism, through the filter of Catholicism, but also Buddhism, and how that relates to himself as an artist, right? And the way he was able to rationalize and justify a lot of things about his life, and the art brought it together.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think that also goes back to that idea of just how well read he was, because in his young life, when he moved around so much, basically due to economic instability in his very early years in the family unit, the Pollard Library was a place that was always Lowell. And when you talk about like Lowell was always home for him, it's not, and in his work, it's not a house. Yeah. It's the whole city.
That's right.
And that is, I think, a mechanism that he developed very early on, was diving into literature in order to find a world that didn't have, you know, some sort of, you know, chaos or insecurity that he felt. You know what I mean? But also the historical context of like the idea of the beginning of the suburbs, right? At the time that he was writing, post-World War II. I think Jack was, a lot of people talk about his writing as being sort of prophetic, and I do think it is, and I think a lot of that has to do with when and where he was born. In Lowell in 1922, which his family came, like Steve, you know, highlights very, you know, beautifully, from Nashua, from Canada down to Nashua to here for economic opportunity, of which his dad found a lot, but he was born right at like the crest of the wave before the mill era collapsed. And then you saw continued, you know, he grew up during, you know, the Great Depression, who they always say it hit Lowell first and lasted longer, yeah. Right? So like that's, you can't take away those filters. But then post-World War II, the beginning of that idea of marketing these suburbs to the returning GIs, particularly the white GIs, yeah. Right? And seeing the marginalization. I think Kerouac was very in tune to those things because of the lived experience he had growing up in Lowell, going into the Great Depression, but also seeing like the opportunities that America could afford somebody if,
That's
you know
right.
what I mean, getting the ticket, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But then seeing those contradictions and, you know, he did have the luxury to give the ticket back,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the fact that that ticket existed, it was a very critical thing in his life. Like football and sports, like for a lot of kids in Lowell, all through the years, was a way to achieve class.
That's right.
Do you know what I mean? And a way to transcend whatever, you know, instability you had growing up. Academia was another one, right?
Yes.
And he achieved in both, but was a nonconformist in every kind of way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I love that you brought out all those themes, because that context is so important when you're looking at what he wrote. And even in the same book, there's like, that's sort of where I've always said, you know, Kerouac shined a light on the genius of African American art, particularly in the form of blues into jazz.
That's right.
In a way that had not been done.
That's right.
And it was not being done in society at the time.
No.
Even the Harlem Renaissance,
Right.
they did not
No.
want to exalt jazz.
That's
Like
right.
that was,
Yeah.
that was, no, we need to stick with the academy.
That's right.
Was the general consensus among the movers and shakers in that movement.
That's right. Yeah.
And that also with Kerouac, when the Beat Generation became a movement and turned into the hippie movement, he was not one for movement. He liked things to be secure,
Right.
like the library, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's good.
Or like the classics of literature
Yeah.
that don't get shaken. Do you know what I mean?
That's right.
So he's such a complicated individual, and but a brilliant artist.
Brilliant
You know what I
artist.
mean? But I just, those themes always resonate for me, and it always, like I'm so glad to hear that you know, highlighted the fact that for him as an artist and as a person, Lowell was his concept of home.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And it's just so important, and that's why what we do at Lowell Celebrates Kerouac is something that just, it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
Because people read about it, they think about it, and they come here. I always say, no matter who we bring into town for our festival, Lowell's the star. You know what I mean? People come here from other places, and you know, I remember there was one woman from Oklahoma who I met years ago, and I said, you know, so what are you thinking about Lowell Celebrates Kerouac? She said, I can't believe it's all real. To the city, you know what I mean? And
Like
so,
a trip to the Holy Land.
there you go, right?
No,
And that's really the spiritual nature of the way people interact with his work.
But you're thinking about how complicated he was. I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to see this really outstanding documentary that came out last summer. What's the Kerouac's Road, the Beat of a Nation? That's what it was called?
Yeah.
I won't get into it except to say there's one of the people who were interviewed, I don't remember who it was, but one of the people they were interviewing, David Amram has a really great appearance in there, but one of the people that they were interviewing just said, he said, Jack Kerouac was the most contradictory figure in the history of American literature. And that was probably, I'd be hard put to argue. I'd be hard put to argue with that. I wanted Linda, talk about earlier about how on the one hand, maybe he could have settled down and taught high school, but they couldn't quite do it. Actually, John Cleveland Holmes speaks to that very point in the first chapter here. Holmes, as I mentioned, is the one who was collaborating with Kerouac when they came up with the term Beat Generation. Just one quick thing here. His lifelong companion, John Cleveland Holmes, captured Jack's dilemma very well in recalling their early years together when they met in New York. When I first met him, that is, say, Kerouac, when I first met him, he wanted to get a farm in New Hampshire. He didn't want to live in the city. He didn't want to go on the road. He was looking for some girl to marry and get a farm somewhere in New Hampshire and raise a family. Thanksgiving, Christmas, all of that. But then Holmes goes on. And yet he was drawn, of course, in the other direction. More powerfully as it turned out, the two things were completely clashing in him. Yeah. I think Holmes pretty well nailed it there.
I want to say a little bit about the jazz thing.
Sure.
In Pick, there's a Kerouac writes the scene in which Slim is practicing for at a club that he's supposedly wants to play later on that night.
Saxophone.
The saxophone, right? One of the most brilliant pieces of literature on jazz performance I've ever read. I don't think I've read any other, and there are lots of, particularly African American writers that write a lot about jazz and blues and consider themselves blues and jazz poets. Outside of James Baldwin's short story Sonny's Blues, in which there's also a depiction of a musician, African American musician, playing this jazz piece. I've never seen it done better. describe better than in Pitt. It's just brilliant. And he knew more about jazz, I think, than most African Americans did at the time. He loved it. I mean, he was an aficionado of jazz music, probably better than any other person alive at that time. As a matter of fact, there's another African American poet, Ted Jones, who was friends with Kerouac. And he taught Ted Jones about jazz. Ted Jones, an African American, he would take him to all the jazz clubs in New York and around the area. And Ted Jones was like, I didn't know much about jazz until I met Jack. That was when I.
Well, he said the same thing in his introduction to Mexico City Blues. He writes, he says, I want to be a jazz poet blowing the long blues on a Sunday afternoon jam session. And Tony, you said that.
Oh yeah, well, I wanted to offer some supporting evidence to all this, so that I knew, Kerouac was around when I was in junior high school before he left to go to Florida, die in Florida. And at my grandmother's house, he took me to the piano, and he showed me how to play the blues scale, and he could do various blues progressions on the left hand, and then he showed me how to do the blues scale, which I learned and was very, I never learned much more than that on the piano, but I loved the blues. I had a blues show when I was in high school, and it was a big influence on me that he knew what he was doing.
He sure did.
He understood music in a way that a lot of the other beats didn't.
That's right.
Ginsberg loved to sing. He loved music. He was very good. But Kerouac had a great voice as well. Great singing voice. There's evidence for that too.
There's evidence even in pop culture. There's a Charlie Christian record with the title Kerouac, which I guess was an instrumental that was untitled. When they went into the studio, they recorded it, and they said, what are we going to call it? I guess it was, and David Amram had said this. Dizzy Gillespie said, call it Kerouac. He's the only one who was ever listening. Because it was in Mittens, and David Amram writes about those, that time period where they would be listening, and, how intently he would listen and just how much he appreciated. But also, Billy Kumatselis, who is the late great Billy Kumatselis, was a big jazz fan, and he told me personally just how much Jack appreciated jazz, and they had that in common.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's funny because if you get Billy's passed now, but there's a CD out there called On the Low Beat, My Times with Kerouac, and there's one where there's a couple of stories in there where Billy talks about the very complicated relationship between Jack and the African American people, like getting basically almost beaten to death in Omar's bar because he went down there very drunk and was like overly familiar, right?
Yeah.
And like a white guy coming into a black environment at that time, right, is not necessarily familiar. It might be very threatening.
To talk about on that is that my Uncle Tony used to go shoot pool with African Americans in the bar here in Lowell.
Yeah.
And they got along. And there was never an incident in Lowell. It was in Florida where he pushed his luck with his familiarity.
Well, Billy writes about an incident where
Something here in Lowell?
at Omar's, and he had to go down there and save him.
Well, I didn't hear that.
Oh yeah.
It's on the CD. But Billy is very careful when he's telling the story to say, but Jack Kerouac loved black people, and he loved black culture. It's that alcoholism, right, that can really make a situation volatile. Do you know what I mean? And that's what I believe was also going on in Florida. You know what I mean?
Florida.
Wasn't that right before he died?
Yeah, right before he died. My
Yeah.
dad contributed to his death.
Well, when you go into a place that you don't know anybody, and you're the only white guy there, and you're going, go man, go! Come on man, go! You're gonna get your ass kicked. That's just basically what's gonna happen.
Cliff.
Yeah, I was much more involved. I've been into Omas. Whites were welcome.
That's right.
You didn't hang around all day. I mean, as a young kid, maybe 18 plus, we were drinking kind of young. But at 18, you could go into Omas and drink. And you'd have a couple because it was a rite of passage. Kerouac went in there and used the N-word, and there were periods in his life. I can't really figure it out. I don't know if anybody can, but he loved blacks all through his life. At the end, especially in Lowell, He walked into Alma's and started yelling at everybody and calling everybody every possible racist word. And they literally were throwing pool balls at him and hitting him with pool sticks. They had to call Billy, who was hanging around over at Nicky's, to come and get him. I don't know how far that would have gone, but there's something that happened to Kerouac at the end of his life, which, and I've been drinking in bars for 50 years.
I'm shocked. I can attest to that.
Not anymore, because I got gout. But the bottom line is, I've never seen an alcoholic change that much. In other words, an alcoholic becomes, if he's boisterous, he's more irritating. If he's irritating, he's a screwball. Kerouac loved all people, he loved blacks. At the end of his life, he was like, he was setting himself up to be a target by just literally saying, you're this and you're that. I've never seen that happen. Something was happening with him. I've never seen that happen.
And Billy says that. He said he had like this Jekyll and Hyde thing at that time in his life.
It's what you were talking about, and I know it's something that's very important to you, is his early football possible head injuries, which might have had something to do with, you know, that could be a problem, you know? I mean, my lord, you know, you get whacked in the...
And then there's the appearance on the William F. Buckley show.
Oh, yeah.
Where he's really lost
The
it.
Vietnam thing?
And he attacks Ed Sanders
And Ginsburg.
Ginsburg sitting in the audience and he goes,
They're sitting in the front
denounces
row.
Ginsburg. It's really sad. I would just say the phrase that Ginsburg said, smart went crazy.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's a good point. Smart went crazy.
Smart went
The
crazy.
story, the line, I can't remember which biography it was in, but the thing about the Buckley show, that's really, you know, if you want to watch two things that will give you sort of the up and down side of Kerouac, watch him on the Steve Allen show when he's reading on the road, and he's reading on the road, and Steve Allen's noodling on the piano, and everybody's applauding. You watch him on that, and then you go back probably about 10 years later.
Almost
And you-
exactly 10 years.
10 years later, and you catch him on the Buckley show, and it's a different thing
I have a hard time
altogether.
explaining to students what the mystique of Kerouac is. Yeah, I try to. You just watch the Steve Allen show, and you've got it all. You've got the poetry, the good looks, the phrasing, the way it interacts with music. In Paul Marion,
I think he left.
He just
slipped
left.
out.
He just left.
He said that footage is almost like a promotional film for the beat movement. It's got everything in it, and it's shot on film. It's not video. They didn't shoot it live in the evening. They shot it and then
That's
showed
right.
it later.
It was a live TV. It was a
And
live
we
show.
barely have that because he threw up. He got drunk right before.
He had a great speaking voice, too. His cadence was very different.
Yeah, the phrase.
The way he talked, his cadence was really, it's hard to capture because, you know, you watch it over and over, and you see that clip.
Yeah.
And just the way he said his own words,
And
really,
the covenant,
nobody
he
else
has a
could say him like
covenant
that.
About I am going to devote myself to recording for the Lord. He says the Lord, and so it's got it all. It's got that amazing passage at the end of On the Road. Think of Dean Williams.
Well, I thought that David Amram made a very interesting.
Hold on, Dean, you had something you wanted to
Oh,
get
I'm
in.
sorry. I didn't see you back there, Dean.
I
Sorry.
wanted to make sure I'd let
Get
you.
on the thing about drinking. I was in the Highland Tap. We usually met
boy,
there.
the Highland.
Kids from the Highland. We drank there on Friday nights and Saturday nights before we decided to do what we did in the evening. So one day this guy comes in, red flannel shirt, baggy jeans, right, and with this guy with a double-breasted suit, and he walks in. And it's unusual the guy has a white double-breasted suit and a Highland Tap, right? So I asked him. I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "From New York." And I said, "Well, who's that guy?" He said, "That Jack Kerouac." And I said, "That's Jack Kerouac." He was bloated, flannel, baggy pants, like I said. And the first thing he said when we got into the bar, he looked around. This is an Irish bar. See, that's where he got into his prejudices, I think. You know, but I just want to bring that up.
And the guy with it was Sterling Lord, his
That's
literary
correct.
agent. Yeah.
But it was an Irish bar.
Could be.
It wasn't really, but
I think also what occurred was there's a generational difference. In my father's generation, he was regarded bigoted by anything. He was the 30s, and that all of the fights, all of the tribalism, for lack of a better term, epithets and everything, it spilled like it was like water running. After World War II, there was a change between the so-called, what was called the lost generation, my mother's generation, which was regarded as the greatest generation. World War II, they opened up the concentration camps, and they couldn't deny it anymore. And, you know, the worst racist of all, Hitler, or one of the worst, because there's plenty more after him, said, of course, you know, nobody remembers the Armenians, nobody, I got away with it, any other, all these other bums, all get away with it. But people saw that, and they couldn't evade it. And that's when it began to get changed. I said, now that that generation's going away, we got a problem, because there's all these little kids running around spouting these same racist type of garbage that actually was back in the bootlegger era. And the point that I think I'm driving home here, Kerouac was sort of at the turning point. So, you know, he was like the guy with Tourette syndrome, which alcohol, who spouted off a bunch of racist epithets at the awards there. Yeah. And so he, substance abuse, alcoholism, or anything like that, as my sensei said, is a profound proof of a essentially miserable inner state. So he had a lot of things miserable about him they couldn't deal with. And so it was that type of contradiction that, that he was caught up with between the culture of one generation, which had begun to be moved back away in the wake of World War II, and people seeing what horrors of any totalitarian regime or any racist regime. But this country let that, I was talking about Jackson, this country let that garbage go on forever here. And people like Hitler and Stalin picked up on it.
All right. I want to loop back to, you mentioned Amaranth. Oh, I'm sorry, Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just fascinated by, hearing sad, the story, of your final encounters with Jack and Omar or whatever, but I don't know what the time period was, but I know clearly, as we do know, near the end of his life, in the last, those years, those alcoholic years, the fact that he had also turned so strongly against, like, the hippies and basically the left in the country, anti-war movement and everything else. I wonder if there was also a reaction at that time, if you're talking the late 60s, when the civil rights movement goes from being, like the way that people would see it through Martin Luther King and, I Have a Dream and a speech, but then by 68 and 69, you're starting to get a much stronger reaction, like in the black community, basically, that's not looking to turn the other cheek so much. And maybe, he was probably, it wouldn't be a surprise to me that the same thing that was turning him against the hippies and other people who he would have maybe thought was on his side, even the people in the beat movement and everything else, that it could have just been that he was kind of just going back to being right wing at the end, because that's where it came from with his parents.
Yeah. Well, that's what I said. I said toward the end of his life, I think I just make a very quick allusion. I just said he slipped back into some of the provinciality that he'd known in early
kind of like, I think he was just lashing out. I think it was anger. So if it was black people, he was going to say the thing that would be the most painful to them, and the things that he would say to Ginsburg and other people were really painful things. It's almost like he tortured soul.
Yeah, and you see that on the Buckley show, where he's sitting there with, answering the questions, and then he starts lashing out at Ginsburg, and they catch a shot of Ginsburg sitting in the audience when Jack is really dumping on it. And Ginsburg got on my back. Gee whiz. I mean, it's really painful to watch that.
I also don't think. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say Buckley probably used that, knowing what
Yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, but because by saying, yeah, he reacted because of Huey Newton, Eldridge Cleaver, Russell Means, Carl Hess, all those.
I don't think he had much respect for the literary works that were coming out during the hippie era either. I don't think that he thought that they were creating a real art, in his opinion.
And he said something very critical, even through his drunkenness in that Buckley interview. He talks about the way he was misunderstood and how they called him the progenitor of a beat revolution or a beat insurrection. And he said, words I've never used, being a Catholic,
Well, it's actually,
meaning that he didn't want to be the face of a movement.
That's exactly.
And David Amram always says this, that when he would talk to him privately, he would say, David, I'm an author. Why won't they read my books? He had no interest in being the face of a movement or a celebrity or famous.
Yeah.
He really wanted esteem for his art, right? And he was concerned with his art as something that would last, right? And so when he wrote about jazz, he talked about Charlie Parker being thought of in the same way as like Mozart or Beethoven, right? So he understood about art and the way it would last. And I think when you get to that idea of him trying to sort of project that longing onto this gang of black women, he's appreciated something that he knows came out of that culture, and he sees society ignoring it and moving away from it, and white flight and the rise of the suburbs and people moving out of the cities. And he's sort of trying to say, no, it's here. It's in here, and I want to be part of this. Do you know what I mean? And it clumsily, you know what I mean? But that's what I hear him saying in that.
Amram makes a very interesting comment too, right towards the end of that documentary I mentioned earlier, the Kerouac's Road. The only two people in that documentary that are interviewed that really knew Jack were David Amram and Joyce Johnson. They're both interviewed there. But anyway, right toward the end of the documentary, David is speaking. He'll be here in October, all 95 years of him. David is speaking, and he's talking about a phone conversation he had with Jack just a few weeks before Kerouac died. And he said in the phone conversation, he says, Jack got to talking about the Milstein interview in the New York Times that, extolled on the road and basically said that Jack was the Hemingway of the World War II generation, just as Hemingway was of World War I. And anyway, this glowing review, and according to Amram, Jack said, well, he says that interview made my literary career and it ruined my life. And now ruin my life might have been a little bit of a stretch, but I got the point anyway. It's like, as Mike was saying, it really put him in a spotlight that he was not at all comfortable with, and it also kind of pigeonholed him. He wanted to be seen as a serious American writer, and he got pigeonholed into this whole beatnik thing, and there it went. So I said, ruin my life might have been a stretch, but but I got the point. Yeah, Tony, you said.
No, I meant just the Steve Allen appearance made him into a celebrity. That was national television at the time. And he went from being an unknown to being, a best-selling. And he didn't fit the avatar that was hung on.
Also, one interesting thing about the Steve Allen interview, it was 58, right? Or 59.
59, yeah.
Yeah, it was 59. It was a month after they had made the album. So he was on TV promoting an album that he did with Steve Allen, with his literature on the record, but also there. So in a way, corporate America was using his literature to sell records to kids in the suburbs in 59. And that was the beginning of that phenomenon. And I think that's something that Kerouac did not want to go whole hog into. He wanted to be an author from the bygone era of the canon that he read, right? That he immersed himself in.
Thomas Wolfe
as a
and
child.
He didn't want to be a celebrity.
And I think he was uniquely attuned to what was going on in that moment. I think that's why he's somewhat uncomfortable with it.
I think the other thing.
Dean.
Oh,
Again, Jack came from Lowell, Massachusetts, graduated in 1939 from Lowell High School. I don't think there was a black person in his class. No. There were never any blacks in New England. It's only post-Vietnam War that African American Hispanics kind of moved into New England. So what happens is he goes to Columbia, his back door is Harlem, right? And Apollo Theater is on 125th Street, because I lived in that area at one time. And he got immersed with the black community because it was his back door. You open up the back door of Columbia, and there it is, Amsterdam Avenue, right there. So this whole thing about him coming from Lowell, sure there were different ethnic groups here, but there weren't blacks, that's for sure. I think my mother told me there were 6 black families in Lowell at that time.
It's interesting though, because there are a lot of Baptist churches here in Lowell, like the big one right over there on Church Street that's in the Zayre's parking lot, and it was a Hale Howard neighborhood. So at one time, there were more blacks here in Lowell.
Yeah, and the Hale Howard neighborhood only.
Right.
Yeah, only.
And the Towers Corner up there was referred to as Uptown Lowell versus Downtown Lowell. So, you know, you talk about like the erasure of Little Canada, you know what I mean? There were blacks in a lot of places, and they moved around a lot too. And it wasn't always by choice. You know what I'm saying? It's not always history that was recorded. You know, I always think, you know, a lot of people don't know, but Martin Luther King, when he went to Harvard, preached in that church over there on Church Street in Zayre's parking lot, right? So there was a black community here that he was coming up to speak to. And now it's in Zayre's parking lot. You know what I'm saying? So,
there was a white minister that brought it in and heard about Lover Root, and we don't know what he talked about. We haven't been able to find those records, but we know he was here.
Yeah, you know how we talk about the ticket, that he got the ticket to get out of here and go to Columbia and be a football player and all that. He gave the ticket back. But he's always coming back here to Lowell. Now in our day, kids are wanting to get that ticket to get the hell out of here and not come back to Lowell. But he always came back to Lowell, always came back to Lowell.
That was where in the
Safety net.
when I was talking about the different terms of the word beat, one of the place I didn't get into in this chapter was he also linked the word beat with beatitude. In other words, saying, meaning try to follow the beatitudes as found in the Sermon on the Mount. His story on that is he got that idea. He on one of his trips back to Lowell, which the church was, he decided to go sit in a sanctuary, one of the Catholic churches.
I think it was Jeanne d'Arc.
It was Jeanne d'Arc? And he, that's when he sat there and it got the idea that the real meaning of beat was beatitude. Somebody that tried to follow the beatitudes was just kind of simple kind of a life. Which he could have lived if he followed Holmes's first inclination and got up to New Hampshire. We wouldn't be having this conversation if he had.
I just want to say, listening to this conversation, I had a realization that Steve Martin must have got the inspiration for the jerk through this in the opening line. I was born a poor black child. Oh, yeah. And I just want to say thank you, Steve Edington, and thanks to everybody on Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. Thank you for everybody coming out. Thank you. I want to leave. I'm gonna, because I do music and stuff, so I'm gonna play Happy Birthday for everybody on the way out. Say Happy Birthday, Jack 104.
And it's just about 4 o'clock, so it seems like a good time to break.
It's all about this one.
And thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you.
Ending on a high note.
On the level of